The Andaman Sea stretches endlessly around North Sentinel Island, where no outsider has ever set foot and lived to tell about it. Pastor David Chen's small aircraft spirals toward the forbidden shore, his emergency beacon screaming into the void as fuel runs out over the most dangerous waters on Earth. What the world doesn't know is that David isn't just any missionary. He's a former Navy SEAL turned man of faith, carrying classified government coordinates to this exact location, coordinates that were supposed to remain secret forever. As his plane slams into the pristine beach, the isolated Sentinelese tribe emerges from the jungle, arrows drawn, faces painted for war. But instead of killing him, they do something that defies 60,000 years of violent history. They save his life. And in doing so, they reveal a truth so explosive it could rewrite human evolution itself. The tribe that shoots anyone who approaches their island just broke their most sacred rule. The question is, why would the world's most isolated people risk everything to save one stranger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. David's consciousness flickered like a dying flame as saltwater filled his lungs. The Cessna's twisted metal groaned against the coral reef, waves pulling him deeper into the crystalline shallows. His last coherent thought before darkness claimed him was of the sealed envelope in his jacket pocket, the one marked with coordinates that weren't supposed to exist. When awareness returned, it came with impossible warmth, not the blazing heat of tropical sun, but something deeper, more penetrating. David's eyes opened to faces unlike any he'd seen in anthropological textbooks, dark skin marked with intricate white patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, eyes that held intelligence far older than their primitive surroundings suggested. A woman knelt beside him, her hands pressed against his chest where 3 broken ribs should have been screaming in agony. Instead, he felt only that strange, healing warmth. She spoke in clicking tones to the dozen warriors surrounding them, their bows lowered but ready. David tried to move, expecting the sharp bite of internal injuries from the crash, but found his body responding normally, more than normally, better than it had in years. The woman's eyes met his, and David felt something impossible pass between them. Recognition. Not of faces or names, but of something fundamental. She knew he was different from other outsiders who had approached their shores. The question that burned through his missionary training and military conditioning alike was simple. How? She helped him sit up, and David's gaze fell on the wreckage of his plane 50 yards down the beach. The impact should have killed him instantly. The twisted metal and scattered debris painted a picture of catastrophic failure, yet here he sat, not just alive, but somehow healthier than when he'd taken off from Port Blair 6 hours ago. The chief warrior, distinguished by a headdress of iridescent feathers, approached with David's waterlogged jacket. He withdrew the sealed envelope with reverence that made David's blood run cold. These people had never seen modern writing, had violently rejected all contact with the outside world for centuries. Yet the chief handled the classified document as if he understood its significance. David watched in stunned silence as the chief carefully opened the envelope and examined the coordinates within. The man's lips moved in what sounded like numbers, coordinates, spoken in accented but unmistakable English. 12 degrees, 35 minutes north, 92 degrees, 14 minutes east. The chief's voice carried authority that transcended language barriers. You carry the old knowledge. The words hit David like a physical blow. This was impossible. The Sentinelese had no contact with the outside world, no written language, no knowledge of modern navigation. Yet this man had just read classified GPS coordinates with perfect accuracy. You speak English, David whispered, his theological certainty crumbling with each impossible revelation. We speak the first language, the chief replied, his dark eyes holding secrets that made David's classified, military clearance seem insignificant. The one your people forgot when they chose to leave. The woman who had healed him stood gracefully, and David noticed for the first time that her hands still glowed with residual warmth. Not metaphorically, actual, visible energy that danced like captured starlight across her palms. "The question, David Chen," the chief continued, using a name he couldn't possibly know, "is whether you're ready to remember what your ancestors abandoned when they scattered across the earth." David's mind reeled. His cover story as a simple missionary lay in ruins alongside his aircraft. These people knew who he was, what he carried, and perhaps why he'd really been sent to their forbidden island. But the growing certainty in his chest told him that his government handlers hadn't sent him here to make contact. They'd sent him home. The salt air stung Michael's nostrils as consciousness crept back like an unwelcome tide. His first coherent thought was that he should be dead. The second was that the ground beneath him felt wrong, too soft, too warm, smelling of herbs rather than blood and twisted metal. He tried to open his eyes but found them sealed with some kind of paste. Panic fluttered in his chest as fragments of memory surfaced. The engine's death rattle, the desperate radio calls that went unanswered, the green canopy rushing up to swallow his single-engine Cessna whole. He remembered the impact, the screaming metal, the taste of copper filling his mouth before everything went black. Voices drifted from somewhere nearby, speaking in a language that sounded like wind through bamboo, rhythmic and musical. The North Sentinelese. The thought should have terrified him. These were the people who had killed fishermen with arrows, who had made it clear for centuries that outsiders weren't welcome. Instead, he felt strangely calm, as if the fear had been carefully extracted from his mind along with whatever other injuries he'd sustained. Gentle hands touched his forehead, and someone began washing the paste from his eyes with what felt like warm tea. When his vision cleared, he found himself staring up at a face that defied every anthropological study he'd ever read about the Sentinelese people. The woman leaning over him appeared to be in her 50s, her dark skin marked with intricate scarification that seemed to shimmer in the filtered sunlight. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath. They held an intelligence so profound it felt ancient, as if she were looking not at him but through him, seeing layers of existence he couldn't comprehend. She spoke, and though he didn't understand the words, he somehow grasped their meaning. "Rest. Heal. You are safe." Michael tried to speak, but managed only a croak. The woman smiled and brought a cup to his lips. The liquid tasted like nothing he'd ever experienced, sweet and bitter simultaneously, with an effervescence that seemed to dance on his tongue. As he drank, he became aware of his body in a way that made no sense. His left leg, which he distinctly remembered being crushed beneath twisted metal, felt whole. His ribs, which should have been shattered, expanded and contracted without pain. The woman helped him sit up, and he found himself in what appeared to be a carefully constructed shelter made from materials salvaged from his plane. The aluminum had been woven seamlessly with palm fronds and bamboo, creating something that looked more like art than emergency housing. Through gaps in the walls, he could see other figures moving about their daily activities, hunting, gathering, tending to children who played with toys that seemed impossibly sophisticated for a Stone Age culture. "How long?" he managed to whisper. The woman tilted her head, considering. When she spoke again, the meaning bloomed in his mind without translation. 7 sons. You were broken. Now you are whole. Michael looked down at his hands, expecting to see cuts and bruises. Instead, his skin appeared unmarked, almost luminous. When he flexed his fingers, he felt a strange energy coursing through his veins, as if his blood had been replaced with liquid starlight. The woman gestured for him to follow her outside. Michael's legs felt unsteady at first, but with each step, strength returned. The village that greeted him shattered every preconception he'd held about the Sentinelese. While the structures appeared primitive from a distance, simple huts made from natural materials, closer inspection revealed an underlying sophistication that made his engineering background recoil in confusion. The joints were too precise, the proportions too mathematically perfect, as if the builders understood principles of construction that hadn't been discovered by the outside world. Children stopped their games to stare at him, but not with fear or hostility. Their expressions held the same ancient intelligence he'd seen in the woman's eyes, as if they were collectively remembering something important about his presence here. The woman led him to the center of the village, where a circle of elders sat around what looked like a simple fire pit, but the flames burned without wood, dancing with colors that shouldn't exist in nature, deep purples and silver whites that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. As they approached, one of the elders, an impossibly old man whose skin appeared to be made of living bark, looked up and spoke. Again, Michael understood without comprehension, the broken bird has mended his wings. But can he remember how to fly? The old man's gaze pierced through him, and Michael felt something shift inside his mind, like a door being unlocked that he hadn't known was there. Images flashed behind his eyes, not memories of his own life, but something older, deeper. Fragments of a history that predated everything he thought he knew about human civilization. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him as the visions faded. "Now you begin to see," her meaning whispered in his thoughts. But seeing and understanding are different flights entirely. The compound microscope hummed softly in Dr. Sarah Chen's lab as she adjusted the focus for the third time in 10 minutes. What she was seeing shouldn't exist. The blood sample from Marcus Webb, the missionary who'd somehow survived 48 hours on North Sentinel Island, defied every principle of modern medicine she'd learned in her 20-year career. "This is impossible," she whispered to the empty laboratory, her breath fogging the eyepiece. The cellular activity was unlike anything in medical literature. Webb's white blood cells moved with an almost choreographed precision, attacking damaged tissue and repairing it at a rate that should have taken weeks, not hours. She'd run the tests 4 times. The results were consistent and terrifying in their implications. A sharp knock interrupted her concentration. Director James Harrison entered without waiting for permission, his face grave beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. Behind him trailed Dr. Michael Torres, the CDC's lead epidemiologist, whose normally calm demeanor seemed frayed at the edges. "Sarah, we need to talk," Harrison said, closing the door with deliberate care. "What you're working on, it stays in this room. Jim, you need to see these results. Webb's blood shows evidence of some kind of advanced medical intervention. The cellular regeneration patterns suggest—" "I know what they suggest," Harrison cut her off. "The question is whether we're ready for what that means." Torres stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Dr. Chen, I've been reviewing satellite footage of North Sentinel Island from the past 72 hours. The Indian government finally granted us access to their surveillance data." He swiped through a series of images. "Look at these thermal signatures." Sarah studied the screen. The heat patterns revealed human figures moving across the island, but their distribution was unlike any primitive settlement she'd seen. The structures were arranged in complex geometric patterns with what appeared to be carefully planned infrastructure. "That's not a Stone Age village," she said slowly. "No, it's not." Torres's voice carried an edge of concern. "And there's something else. The Indian Coast Guard reported unusual electromagnetic activity in the area during Webb's time there. Frequency patterns that don't match any known natural phenomena." Harrison moved to the window overlooking the hospital courtyard, where news vans had multiplied like bacteria since word of Webb's rescue had leaked. "The world thinks this is a feel-good story about tribal compassion. A missionary plane crashes. Indigenous people show mercy instead of violence. The media's eating it up." "But Webb's medical records tell a different story," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. His injuries when he was found, they were healing too cleanly, too fast. And these blood samples show cellular activity that would require biotechnology we don't possess. She paused, the implications cascading through her mind like falling dominoes. The Sentinelese didn't just treat his wounds with primitive medicine. They used something else, something advanced. Torres nodded grimly, which raises uncomfortable questions about what we think we know about human development. The Sentinelese have been isolated for an estimated 60,000 years. According to everything we understand about civilization, they should be living exactly as our ancestors did, before agriculture. before metallurgy, before written language. But they're not, Harrison finished. The question is, do we investigate further, or do we bury this before it spirals beyond our control? Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You're talking about covering up a potential breakthrough in medical science. If they have knowledge that could revolutionize healing. We're talking about preserving global stability, Harrison interrupted. Imagine what happens when the world learns that an isolated tribe possesses technology that makes our best hospitals look medieval. The religious implications alone would trigger chaos. Every government, every corporation, every extremist group on the planet would want access to that island. Through the window, Sarah watched reporters setting up for the evening broadcasts. The story they were telling was simple, digestible, a tale of unexpected mercy in an hostile world. The truth was far more complex and dangerous. "What about Webb?" she asked. "He was conscious when they brought him in. He knows what happened to him there." "Webb's been sedated since arrival," Torres said quietly. "Officially for his own medical safety. Unofficially, we need time to decide how to handle this situation." Sarah looked back at the microscope, at the impossible blood sample that challenged everything she thought she knew about human capability. "And if we decide to investigate, if we try to make contact?" Harrison's expression hardened. "Then we risk destroying both civilizations, theirs and ours. Some knowledge comes with a price too high to pay." The laboratory fell silent except for the soft electronic humming of equipment. Outside, the sun was setting over a world that had no idea how fundamentally its understanding of itself might be about to change. Sarah Chen stared at the blood sample that held secrets spanning millennia and wondered if some truths were indeed too dangerous for the light. The pain receded like a tide pulling back from shore, leaving Marcus suspended in a haze between sleep and waking. His body felt impossibly light, as if gravity had loosened its grip on his bones. When he tried to open his eyes, the world appeared through a gossamer veil, shapes moving with fluid grace around him, voices speaking in melodic tones that seemed to resonate in his chest rather than his ears. A woman's face materialized above him, her features sharp and beautiful in the amber light filtering through what appeared to be woven walls. Her skin was dark bronze, marked with intricate patterns of dots and lines that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. She pressed something cool and smooth against his forehead, and immediately the throbbing in his skull subsided to a distant murmur. "Rest," she said, though her lips didn't move in quite the right way for the English word he heard. "The healing goes deep." Marcus tried to speak, to ask where he was, what had happened to his plane, how long he'd been unconscious. But his tongue felt thick and unresponsive, and the questions dissolved before they could form. The woman's eyes were unlike anything he'd ever seen, not just their color, which shifted between green and gold like sunlight through leaves, but their depth. Looking into them was like staring into clear water that went down much farther than should be possible. Other figures moved through his peripheral vision, their footsteps silent on the woven floor. They carried vessels made of what looked like carved wood, though the grain patterns swirled in ways that defied natural growth. Steam rose from the containers, carrying scents that reminded him simultaneously of ocean spray and mountain pine, of his grandmother's garden, and places he'd never been but somehow remembered. "The metal bird brought you," the woman continued, her voice layering over itself in harmonics that made Marcus wonder if he was hallucinating. "But the island called you here. It has been waiting." Through the haze, Marcus caught glimpses of the space around him. The structure seemed both ancient and impossibly sophisticated, organic curves that flowed like living tissue, yet geometric precision that would challenge modern architects. Soft bioluminescent patches dotted the ceiling like constellations, pulsing gently in rhythm with something Marcus gradually realized was his own heartbeat. A man appeared beside the woman, tall and lean with silver threading through his dark hair. His movements held the careful grace of someone accustomed to navigating in 3 dimensions. When he knelt beside Marcus, his proximity brought a sensation like standing near a powerful electrical generator, not threatening, but charged with potential. Sarah sends her concern. the man said, and Marcus's heart lurched. How could they possibly know about Sarah? The connection carries far when the need is great. Marcus managed to croak out a single word. How? The man and woman exchanged a look that contained volumes of silent communication. Around them, the other figures paused in their movements, as if his question had triggered some kind of decision point. The isolation was necessary, the woman said finally. Your people think us primitive because we choose to remain apart, but we have been waiting for the right moment, the right messenger. She touched his chest with fingers that seemed to conduct warmth directly into his ribs. The world is changing, Marcus Wade. The old barriers are breaking down. The sound of his name spoken aloud shattered the last of his skepticism about hallucinations. Whatever was happening here was real, no matter how impossible it seemed. Marcus forced his eyes to focus, fighting through the pleasant fog that clouded his thoughts. You're the Sentinelese, he whispered. We are the keepers, the man corrected. Your anthropologists see only what we allow them to see. The aggression, the isolation, the primitive tools, all carefully maintained theater. We learned long ago that sometimes the best way to protect something precious is to convince the world it doesn't exist. The woman reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew something that made Marcus's breath catch. It was a device of some kind, translucent and organic-looking, but pulsing with an inner light that spoke of technology far beyond anything he'd encountered. When she placed it against his temple, his vision suddenly sharpened, and the last of the pain vanished. "What are you protecting?" he asked. Instead of answering, the woman helped him sit up. Through an opening in the wall that Marcus hadn't noticed before, he could see outside. What he saw made him forget every question he'd been about to ask. The forest beyond pulsed with veins of soft blue light running through the trees like an enormous circulatory system. Structures that looked grown rather than built rose seamlessly from the earth, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns. And moving among it all were people, hundreds of them, their movements coordinated in a dance of purpose that spoke of a civilization far more complex than anything the outside world had ever imagined. The question, the man said quietly, is whether your people are ready for the truth. The morning sun filtered through the canopy as Marcus followed Kaya deeper into the island's heart. His leg, miraculously healed, moved without pain for the first time in weeks. The impossibility of it gnawed at him with each step. Modern medicine couldn't explain what had happened in that hut, yet here he was, walking on what should have been shattered bone. Kaya moved with fluid grace ahead of him, occasionally glancing back with those unsettling dark eyes. She spoke in her native tongue to the other islanders who emerged from hidden paths, their voices carrying melodic undertones that seemed to resonate in Marcus's chest. He'd studied dozens of languages during his missionary work, but this was unlike anything he'd encountered. They crested a hill, and Marcus stopped dead. Below them stretched a valley that defied everything he knew about the Sentinelese. Instead of the primitive settlement he'd expected, terraced gardens cascaded down the slopes in perfect geometric patterns. Structures that appeared to be carved from living trees formed an organic city that breathed with the forest itself. Water flowed through channels that seemed to follow impossible physics, flowing upward in places before cascading into crystalline pools. "This can't be real," Marcus whispered. Kaya turned, and when she spoke, her words came in accented but clear English. "Real is what you choose to see, Marcus Hayes." He staggered backward. "You speak English. How long have you—" "We speak many languages. We listen to your world through the waves, through the wind, through the voices that carry across water." She gestured toward the valley. "Your people think we are primitive because we choose isolation. They do not understand that some knowledge is too dangerous to share." A chill ran down Marcus's spine despite the tropical heat. What knowledge? Instead of answering, Kaya began descending the path. Marcus had no choice but to follow, his mind reeling. The closer they got to the settlement, the more his worldview crumbled. Children played with devices that seemed to manipulate light itself, creating rainbow bridges between their hands. Elders tended plants that grew in spiraling helixes, their fruits glowing with soft bioluminescence. The British missionary, Marcus said suddenly. John Allen Chow. What happened to him? Kaya's stride faltered for just a moment. He came with fire in his heart and fear in his mind. He could not accept what he saw. Some souls are too rigid to bend. They break instead. You killed him. We protected ourselves. And we protected him from a truth that would have destroyed him. She stopped and faced Marcus fully. The question is whether you are strong enough to hear it. They reached the valley floor where more islanders gathered. Marcus noticed something that made his breath catch. Among the traditional grass skirts and body paint, several wore what looked like metallic armbands that pulsed with subtle energy. One elderly man approached, his band glowing brighter as he neared. The man placed his hand on Marcus's forehead before he could protest. Images flooded his mind, not his own memories, but something far older. He saw vast cities beneath the ocean, civilizations that had risen and fallen before recorded history. He saw the migration of peoples carrying knowledge that predated Egypt, Sumeria, even Atlantis, knowledge of consciousness itself, of how thought could shape matter, how intention could heal or destroy. Marcus gasped, pulling away. What was that? The memory of our ancestors, the elder said in perfect English. We are the last guardians of the first wisdom, the knowledge your species possessed before it forgot how to truly see. That's impossible. Human civilization began. Your civilization began when ours chose to hide. Kaya's voice carried sadness now. When your ancestors turned knowledge into weapons, turned healing into control, turned unity into dominion. We retreated here, to the last pure place, to keep the old ways alive. Marcus looked around the valley with new eyes. The impossible architecture, the healing that had saved his leg, the way these people seemed to communicate without words. It wasn't primitive at all. It was evolved beyond anything the modern world had achieved. Why are you showing me this? Because the barriers grow thin, the elder said. Your world reaches toward us with satellites and boats, with curiosity and greed. The time of hiding may be ending whether we choose it or not. Kaya stepped closer. Your plane did not crash by accident, Marcus Hayes. You were guided here, chosen. The question is whether you will become a bridge between worlds or another threat we must eliminate. The weight of her words settled on his shoulders like a mountain. Marcus thought of his mission, his faith, his certainty about bringing light to the darkness. But standing here in this impossible place, surrounded by people who had preserved something humanity had lost, he wondered who really lived in darkness. The setting sun painted the valley gold, and Marcus realized that everything he'd believed about civilization, about progress, about truth itself, was about to change forever. The satellite phone crackled to life in Dr. Sarah Chen's cramped laboratory aboard the research vessel Eneridian. She nearly dropped her coffee as Director Harrison's voice cut through the static, delivering news that made her question her sanity. You're telling me Marcus Webb is alive, on North Sentinel Island? Sarah gripped the phone tighter. That's impossible. The Sentinelese have killed every outsider who's attempted contact for centuries. The transmission came through 20 minutes ago. Audio only, but it's definitely Webb's voice. We've run voice pattern analysis twice. Harrison's tone carried the weight of disbelief. He claims they're not what we think they are, Sarah. Says they've been hiding something extraordinary. Sarah stared out at the endless expanse of the Andaman Sea, her mind racing. As the world's leading expert on isolated populations, she'd spent years studying the Sentinelese from afar, respecting the Indian government's protective barrier around their 23-square-mile sanctuary. The tribe's fierce rejection of outside contact had made them legends, the last free people on Earth, guardians of their own pristine world. I need to get closer to the island, she said finally. Absolutely not. The Indian Navy has the area under complete lockdown. No one gets within 12 nautical miles. But Sarah was already moving toward the bridge, her scientific curiosity overriding every protocol. Something's changed, Director. If they saved Webb instead of killing him, we're looking at a fundamental shift in everything we understand about first contact scenarios. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself in a heated video conference with officials from 3 governments and 2 international organizations. The Indian Maritime Authority was adamant, no exceptions to the exclusion zone. The anthropological community was in chaos, with half demanding immediate rescue operations and the other half insisting on non-interference. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, Sarah's former mentor, leaned into her camera from Cambridge. The ethical implications are staggering. If we mount a rescue, we could destroy the very culture that saved this man's life. But if we don't, he could be dead by tomorrow, finished Admiral Krishnamurthy from New Delhi. Or worse, his presence could trigger an epidemic that wipes out the entire population. These people have no immunity to our diseases. Sarah studied the grainy satellite footage of North Sentinel Island on her screen. The dense canopy revealed nothing, but somewhere beneath those trees, a man who shouldn't be alive was claiming the impossible. What exactly did Webb say in his transmission? Harrison consulted his notes. Quote, "They're not primitive. They never were. They've been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. The whole world needs to know what I've seen here." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. In 15 years of studying isolated cultures, she'd never encountered anything like this. The Sentinelese had maintained their isolation through calculated aggression, driving away fishermen, government officials, and missionaries with spears and arrows. They were hunter-gatherers, living as their ancestors had for millennia. What could Webb possibly have discovered that would challenge that understanding? "There's something else," Harrison continued. "Our long-range audio surveillance picked up sounds from the island last night. Mechanical sounds." The conference room fell silent. Sarah felt her world shift slightly off its axis. "Mechanical? Define mechanical." "Low-frequency humming, rhythmic. Our acoustics team says it doesn't match any natural phenomenon they've catalogued." Dr. Reeves removed her glasses, cleaning them with trembling hands. "This is unprecedented. If there's any truth to what Webb is suggesting, then we're not just looking at a rescue mission," Sarah interrupted. "We're looking at a complete rewrite of human history." Admiral Krishnamurthy's expression darkened. "Or we're looking at the delusions of a man suffering from severe head trauma and isolation psychosis. I've seen it before. Crash survivors will hallucinate entire civilizations." But Sarah was already formulating a plan. The Meridian Guardian was equipped with advanced sonar and underwater scanning equipment. If she couldn't get onto the island, perhaps she could learn something from the waters around it. The seafloor might hold clues about the Sentinelese past that no one had bothered to examine. "I'm requesting permission to conduct oceanic surveys just outside the exclusion zone," she announced. "Dr. Chen, the risks of not knowing are greater." She cut off Harrison's objection. "If Marcus Webb is right, if there's something extraordinary about this place, then we have a responsibility to understand it, but we also have a responsibility to protect it." As the conference dissolved into arguments about jurisdiction and protocol, Sarah slipped away to prep her equipment. Tomorrow she would begin mapping the waters around North Sentinel Island, searching for answers in the dark depths below. She had no idea that beneath the waves, ancient structures waited in the shadows, their purpose hidden for millennia. Nor did she know that Marcus Webb's discovery would soon force humanity to confront a truth that would shatter everything they believed about their own origins. The island kept its secrets well, but not for much longer. The morning light filtered through the canopy as Marcus helped Kyle prepare what looked like a ceremonial mixture. His hands had steadied considerably over the past few days, though the tremor in his left arm reminded him of how close he'd come to never using it again. "The preparation must be exact," Kyle said, grinding what appeared to be tree bark with a smooth stone. "Too little and the connection fails, too much and the mind cannot return." Marcus watched the careful process, noting how Kyle's movements followed a precise rhythm. The elderly healer had been patient with his questions, but Marcus sensed they were approaching something that couldn't be explained, only experienced. In your world, Kyle continued, you seek proof before belief. Here, we understand that some truths exist beyond proof. The mixture took on a deep amber color as Kyle added drops of a clear liquid from a small gourd. The scent that rose from the bowl was unlike anything Marcus had encountered, earthy but with an almost metallic undertone that made his sinuses tingle. My grandfather's grandfather spoke of visitors like you, Kyle said, his voice taking on the cadence of oral tradition. Men with pale skin who came in great vessels seeking to claim our land for distant kings. They brought weapons and diseases, but they also brought something else, a hunger that could never be satisfied. Marcus felt a chill despite the warm morning air. What happened to them? The island protected itself, as it always has. Kyle's eyes met his, but not in the way your people believe. Before Marcus could ask what he meant, voices arose from the village center. Kyle's expression shifted immediately to one of concern. Arun returns, he said, setting aside the bowl, earlier than expected. They emerged from Kyle's hut to find a crowd gathering around 3 figures who had just entered the village. Arun stood at the center, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. Beside him were 2 younger men Marcus recognized as scouts, their faces grim. Arun's eyes found Marcus immediately, and something passed between them, a warning perhaps, or an apology. The outsiders moved strangely, one of the scouts reported in the island's language. Marcus had picked up enough words to follow the general meaning. Their boats circle but do not approach. They drop things into the water. Kyle translated quietly. Search and rescue operations, most likely. They're looking for you. 3 days they have done this, the other scout added, and their boats grow in number. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd known this moment would come, but the reality of it hit harder than expected. The outside world wouldn't simply forget about him. There would be investigations, international pressure, satellite surveillance. Arun approached, his weathered features showing the strain of difficult decisions. We must speak, he said to Marcus in English, then added something in his own language that caused several villagers to disperse. They walked to a clearing at the village's edge where the sound of waves provided a natural barrier to eavesdropping. Arun was quiet for a long moment, studying the horizon. Your people will not stop looking, he finally said. No, they won't. Marcus watched a seabird dive for fish in the shallows. The Indian government will be under pressure to investigate. The church will want answers about their missing missionary. And you? What do you want? The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus thought about his life before the crash, the certainty he'd carried about his mission, the absolute faith that had driven him to risk everything to reach this place. That certainty felt distant now, replaced by something more complex. I want to understand, he said. What Kyle was showing me, what you've all been trying to tell me, I need to understand it. Arun nodded slowly. Understanding comes with a price. Once you know certain things, you cannot unknow them. Your world, your people, your beliefs, they may never make sense to you again. And if I choose not to understand, if I ask you to help me signal those boats, then you return to your life, and we return to ours. The island keeps its secrets, as it has for thousands of years. Arun's voice carried no judgment, only statement of fact, but the knowledge that brought you back from death's edge, the healing that should have been impossible, that knowledge dies with this conversation. Marcus felt the weight of the choice settling on his shoulders. In the distance, almost invisible against the horizon, he could make out the dark shapes of patrol boats. His rescue was perhaps a signal flare away. He could return to everything familiar, report the islanders as peaceful, and spend the rest of his life wondering what he'd walked away from. Or he could step forward into something that would change everything. How long do I have to decide? The ceremony must happen tonight, when the moon is dark, Arun replied. After that, the window closes for another month. By then, he didn't need to finish. By then, the search would have intensified beyond their ability to remain hidden. The morning brought with it a clarity that Thomas had forgotten existed. The fever that had ravaged his body for days had finally broken, leaving him weak but lucid. Arun sat beside him, carefully applying a paste made from crushed leaves to the healing wounds on his leg. The old man's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, and Thomas found himself studying the intricate patterns tattooed along his healer's forearms. "Your body fights well," Arun said, his English heavily accented but clear. "The ancestors smile upon your recovery." Thomas struggled to sit up, his mind still reeling from the impossibility of their conversation. "How do you know English? Your people have been isolated for thousands of years." A shadow crossed Arun's weathered face. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands never pausing in their ministrations. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of carefully guarded secrets. "Isolation is a choice we made, not a prison we were born into. Long ago, my people walked many paths across this world. We learned much, perhaps too much." Through the entrance of the hut, Thomas could see the village coming alive. Children played with carved wooden toys, while women prepared food over small fires. Men crafted tools with precision that spoke of generations of refined technique. It looked primitive, but Thomas was beginning to understand that appearances here were deliberately misleading. "What do you mean, too much?" he pressed. Arun's hands stilled. He looked directly into Thomas's eyes, and for a moment the missionary felt as if he were being weighed and measured by an intelligence far older than the man before him. "Come, you are strong enough now. There is something you must see." With Arun's help, Thomas managed to stand. His leg protested, but the pain was manageable. They walked slowly through the village, and Thomas noticed details he had missed in his delirium. The construction of the huts was far more sophisticated than it appeared, with intricate joinery that required no nails or bindings. The tools, while made of wood and stone, showed mathematical precision in their design. They reached the edge of the settlement, where a path led into the dense jungle. Arun guided him along it, moving with the sure steps of someone who had walked this route countless times. The canopy above grew thicker, filtering the sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. After 20 minutes of careful walking, they emerged into a circular clearing. Thomas gasped. In the center stood a structure that defied everything he thought he knew about this isolated tribe. It was a perfect stone circle, with pillars arranged in precise astronomical alignment. But more shocking still were the symbols carved into the stones, symbols that Thomas recognized from his theological studies. "This is impossible," he whispered, approaching the nearest pillar. The markings were ancient, but they bore unmistakable resemblance to early Christian iconography, alongside symbols from Hinduism, Buddhism, and religions he couldn't identify. "Your missionaries came here before," Arun said quietly. "Many times, across many centuries. Portuguese, Dutch, British. They brought their stories of the Christ, the Buddha, the Prophet. We listened, we remembered." Thomas ran his fingers over the carved stone, feeling the smooth wear of age. "But the records, the historical accounts, they all say contact was impossible, that your people drove outsiders away. We drove away those who came to take, those who came to give, to share knowledge. They were welcomed. But we learned that knowledge comes with a price, and so we made a choice." The old man walked to the center of the circle, where a flat stone served as an altar. Upon it lay objects that made Thomas's breath catch: a corroded brass cross, a fragment of what looked like a medieval manuscript, and a small statue that appeared to be Buddhist in origin. "We collected the wisdom of your world, studied it, preserved it, but we also saw what it cost you, the wars fought over whose God was true, the destruction of those who believed differently, the rape of the earth in the name of progress." Arun's voice carried profound sadness. "We chose to step back, to preserve what was good and leave behind what was poison." Thomas felt his worldview crumbling around him. Everything he had believed about primitive societies, about the spread of civilization, about his own mission, it was all built on incomplete understanding. But why show me this? Why risk exposure after all these years? Arun looked up at the sky, where storm clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. Because something is changing. The barriers we built, the protection we maintained, it grows weak. And you, he studied Thomas's face intently, you carry something different, a hunger for truth rather than conquest. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. As the first raindrops began to fall, he realized that his crash on this island had been no accident. The questions multiplying in his mind would have to wait, because Arun was already leading him back toward the village, moving with an urgency that suggested their time for revelations had run out. The ancient chamber stretched before David like a cathedral carved from living stone, its walls pulsing with that ethereal blue light that seemed to emanate from within the rock itself. Carla moved beside him with reverent steps, her fingers tracing symbols that had been etched into the walls millennia ago. Each glyph seemed to respond to her touch, brightening momentarily before settling back into its gentle luminescence. "Your people," David whispered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "They've been guardians all this time." Carla nodded, her expression grave. "Since the great burning, since the waters rose and the sky wept fire," she gestured to a massive mural that dominated the far wall. "We are the last watchers, the final sentinels of what was." David approached the mural, his breath catching as the images resolved before his eyes. It wasn't primitive art, it was sophisticated beyond anything he'd seen in archaeological texts. The scenes depicted a civilization of impossible grandeur, towering spires that seemed to pierce the heavens, vehicles that moved without wheels across both land and sky, and people whose technology had achieved harmony with the natural world rather than dominance over it. "This isn't possible," he breathed, but even as he spoke the words, he knew they were false. The evidence stood before him, carved in stone and confirmed by the living descendants who had preserved its memory. Carla's hand found his shoulder. "Your people forgot. When the great catastrophe came, when the cities fell and the knowledge was lost, the survivors scattered. Some built new civilizations, crude copies of what had been. Others, like us, were chosen to remember, to guard the truth until the world was ready to reclaim it." The implications crashed over David like waves. Everything humanity thought it knew about its own history was incomplete, a fragment of a much larger and more complex story. The archaeological record that placed the dawn of civilization at mere thousands of years ago suddenly seemed laughably inadequate. "But why?" he asked, turning to face her. "Why reveal this to me? Why now?" Before Carla could answer, a commotion echoed from the tunnel behind them. Voices, sharp and urgent, carried through the stone passages. Carla's expression shifted instantly to one of alarm. "They found us," she said, grabbing David's arm. "The elders who oppose this revelation. They believe the world is still too broken to receive such knowledge. What will they do? Ensure the secret remains buried permanently." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the rhythmic chanting of what David now recognized as protective incantations. Carla pulled him deeper into the chamber, toward what appeared to be a solid wall covered in intricate geometric patterns. "There's another way," she said, pressing her palm against a specific sequence of symbols. The wall shimmered and began to dissolve, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "But once we take this path, there's no turning back. You'll see the heart of our guardianship, the source of our responsibility, and that knowledge will change you forever." David hesitated, glancing back toward the tunnel entrance where shadows were beginning to dance in the blue light. The voices grew closer, and he could hear his name being spoken in tones that didn't sound welcoming. "What's down there?" he asked. Carla's eyes reflected the ancient light around them, and for a moment she looked far older than her years. "The reason your plane didn't crash by accident, the reason you survived when you should have died, the reason you were chosen to come here, even if you don't understand it yet." The first figures appeared at the tunnel mouth, elderly Sentinelese with expressions of stern disapproval. They began speaking rapidly to Carla in their ancient tongue, their gestures sharp and commanding. She responded with equal intensity, her voice rising in what David recognized as defiance. One of the elders pointed directly at David and spoke a single word that needed no translation. The malice in it was universal. Outsider. Carla stepped protectively in front of David, her response cutting through the chamber like a blade. The elders recoiled slightly, their expressions shifting from anger to something approaching fear. "What did you tell them?" David asked quietly. "The truth, that the time of hiding is ending, whether they accept it or not. That the world above is on the verge of destroying itself, just as the ancients did, and intervention may be necessary." The elders began moving forward again, more cautiously now but with obvious intent. Carla grabbed David's hand and pulled him toward the hidden passage. "Choose now," she urged. "Return with them to safety and ignorance, or come with me and learn why your civilization's survival may depend on secrets that have been buried for 10,000 years. David looked at the approaching figures, then at the mysterious passage that seemed to pulse with its own inner life. Everything rational told him to choose safety, to accept whatever exile or silence the elders demanded. Instead, he stepped into the passage. The helicopter's rotors cut through the humid air as Marcus watched North Sentinel Island shrink beneath them. His hands trembled as he clutched the waterproof bag containing Kyle's translated fragments, evidence that would reshape humanity's understanding of itself. The Sentinelese had trusted him with their most sacred secret, and now he was fleeing like a thief in the night. "ET to Port Blair, 20 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Behind them, 3 more helicopters followed in tight formation, their military markings stark against the azure sky. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Kyle's final words. "Some knowledge is a burden, Marcus. Are you prepared to carry it?" He hadn't understood then. The weight of what he'd learned, that the Sentinelese possessed records dating back 40,000 years, that they were the guardians of humanity's true origin story, felt crushing now. His satellite phone buzzed. Director Hayes's number flashed on the screen. "Dr. Chen, I trust you've secured the materials." Hayes's voice carried that familiar corporate smoothness that had once reassured Marcus, but now made his skin crawl. "The Sentinelese shared some historical documents, yes. But Hayes, what I've found, it's not what we expected. These people aren't primitive. They're the keepers of—" "Save the anthropological theories for your report, Doctor. Right now I need to know about practical applications, military applications." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "Military? These are cultural artifacts, historical records. You said this was about archaeological preservation." Hayes chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Did I? How naive. Dr. Chen, your translations mention advanced metallurgy, sophisticated navigation techniques, and something about the deep knowledge. Knowledge that allowed these people to survive every catastrophe for millennia. That's not just historical curiosity, that's strategic advantage." The helicopter shuddered through turbulence, but the tremor in Marcus's hands had nothing to do with the aircraft's movement. "You can't militarize their culture. These people trusted me. They saved my life. And now they'll save many more lives. American lives. Do you have any idea what those navigation techniques could mean for submarine warfare? What their metallurgy could do for our armor development?" Marcus stared at the bag in his lap. Inside were detailed drawings of star charts the Sentinelese had used for navigation. Metallurgical formulas, Kyle claimed, came from the first teachers, and most damning of all, coordinates to other isolated sites around the Pacific, places where similar knowledge might be hidden. "I won't be part of this," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "You already are part of it, Doctor. You signed the contracts, you accepted the funding, and more importantly, you're the only one who can read their script." The helicopter began its descent toward Port Blair. Below, Marcus could see the harbor bustling with activity, too much activity. Military vessels dotted the water like steel islands, and the docks swarmed with personnel. This wasn't a research operation anymore. It was an invasion force preparing. "My God," Marcus whispered, "you're going back for them." The Sentinelese have proven remarkably resilient to outside contact. But resilience has limits. Our ethnologists believe that with the right pressure, cutting off their fishing areas, controlling their freshwater access, they'll become more cooperative, less protective of their secrets. Marcus's stomach lurched. The idea of using siege tactics against Kyle's people, against the children who had played around the healing fires, against Anara who had treated his wounds with such care, it was monstrous. "They'll die first," Marcus said. "They've chosen death over contact for centuries. You'll be committing genocide." Dramatic language, Doctor. We prefer to think of it as aggressive archaeology. The helicopter touched down on the military base's landing pad with a metallic thud. Soldiers immediately surrounded the aircraft, their weapons ready. Marcus realized with growing horror that he wasn't just a returning researcher, he was a secured asset. As the rotors wound down, Hayes's voice cut through the diminishing noise. "Dr. Chen, I hope you understand your position now. You have two choices. Continue your translations and help us approach the Sentinelese diplomatically, preserving their lives and culture while sharing their knowledge. Or refuse, and we'll extract what we need through less gentle means." Marcus stepped out of the helicopter, his legs unsteady on the tarmac. The soldiers flanked him as he walked toward a waiting Humvee, the waterproof bag feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. In the distance, he could see the naval vessels preparing to deploy. Soon they would return to North Sentinel Island, not as visitors or researchers, but as conquerors, and whether he cooperated or not, the result would be the same. The last free people on Earth were about to lose their freedom. As the Humvee's doors slammed shut around him, Marcus made a decision that would either save the Sentinelese or doom them all. His hand moved slowly toward the bag's zipper, toward the most dangerous secret of all, the one he hadn't told Hayes about yet. The satellite phone crackled to life at 0347 hours, jolting Marcus Chen from restless sleep in his cramped quarters aboard the research vessel Meridian. 3 weeks had passed since the last transmission from Dr. Sarah Voss, and the silence had eaten away at him like acid. "Marcus, can you hear me?" Sarah's voice came through distorted, barely recognizable through layers of static and what sounded like deliberate interference. He fumbled for the handset, nearly dropping it in his haste. "Sarah! Jesus, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for—" "Listen carefully. I don't have much time." Her words came in urgent bursts. "Everything we thought we knew is wrong. The Sentinelese aren't just isolated, they're guardians. They've been protecting something for millennia." Marcus scrambled for his recording equipment, hands shaking. In the background of Sarah's transmission, he could hear unfamiliar sounds, rhythmic chanting that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and beneath that, something else. Something that made his skin crawl despite the tropical heat. "What kind of protection?" "Sarah, you're not making sense. The ruins aren't random. They're a containment system. The entire island is built over something that was sealed away long before recorded history. The tribe knows about it. They've passed down the knowledge through oral tradition for over 15,000 years. The connection wavered, dissolving into white noise before stabilizing again. When Sarah's voice returned, it carried a note of panic that Marcus had never heard from her before. "There are others coming. Government types, military. They've been monitoring our communication somehow. David's translations triggered something. Alerts in systems I didn't even know existed." Marcus pressed the phone closer to his ear, straining to catch every word. "Sarah, you need to get out of there. We can extract you." "You don't understand. I can't leave. None of us can. David tried to swim to the reef yesterday morning. The water, it wouldn't let him pass. Every time he got beyond the shallows, currents pulled him back, impossibly strong currents that only affect humans." The chanting in the background grew louder, and Marcus caught fragments of what sounded like David's voice joining in, speaking in a language he didn't recognize but that somehow felt ancient, primal. "The barrier isn't just physical," Sarah continued. "It's tied to the same force that's been healing us, changing us. I can feel it in my bones now, Marcus. Yesterday I cut my hand on a sharp stone, deep enough to need stitches. When I woke up this morning, there wasn't even a scar. Static burst across the line, and when it cleared, Marcus heard new voices in the background. Authoritative, English-speaking, military. Dr. Voss, step away from the communication device. Sarah's voice became a harsh whisper. They're here. 3 helicopters coming in fast from the west. The tribe elder, Kala, she says this was foretold. She says the time of watching is ending. Sarah, who's there? What do you see? Soldiers. Scientists with equipment I don't recognize. They're setting up some kind of scanning array on the beach. Her breathing grew rapid, panicked. Oh God, Marcus. The ground is starting to vibrate. The tribal songs are getting louder and the children are crying. Even they can feel it. The line crackled again, and Marcus heard new sounds, mechanical humming that seemed to harmonize with the tribal chanting in a way that raised every hair on his arms. Dr. Voss, I repeat, step away from the device. This area is now under military jurisdiction. The soldiers aren't here for us. Sarah's voice came through in fragments now. They know about the containment system. They're trying to breach it. The tribe is gathering at the central ruins, forming circles around the stone formations. Kala keeps repeating something in their language. David says it translates to, "The sleeper stirs." A new voice cut through the transmission, authoritative, cold. Dr. Chen, this is Colonel Amanda Pierce, U.S. Defense Research Initiative. You are to cease all communication with the North Sentinel Island expedition immediately and report to coordinates we're transmitting to your vessel. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Colonel, I demand to know what's happening to my team. Your team has stumbled onto a classified site of international importance. They're safe, but they're now under protective custody while we assess the situation. In the background, Marcus could hear Sarah calling out, her voice growing distant as if she was being moved away from the phone. Marcus, whatever they tell you, don't let them open it. The tribe's stories, they're not myths. They're warnings. The connection went dead with a finality that spoke of severed cables rather than atmospheric interference. Marcus stared at the silent phone for a long moment, then began frantically gathering his equipment. Whatever was happening on North Sentinel Island, Sarah and David were trapped in the middle of it. And from the sound of Colonel Pierce's voice, extraction wasn't going to be an option. The game had just changed completely. The emergency session at the World Health Organization felt more like a war council than a medical conference. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the data streaming across multiple monitors, each screen showing impossible results that defied everything she understood about human biology. The blood samples from the Missionary are unlike anything in our databases, she announced to the room full of epidemiologists, geneticists, and government officials. The cellular regeneration rate is approximately 40 times faster than normal human tissue. The telomeres show no signs of degradation. In fact, they appear to be lengthening. Director Williams leaned forward. What are you saying, Dr. Chen? I'm saying that David Mercer shouldn't be alive. The injuries documented in his medical file from the crash should have killed him 3 times over. Yet here he is, not just surviving, but showing cellular activity that suggests... She paused, struggling with the implications. Biological immortality. The room erupted in murmurs. In the corner, Colonel Harrison spoke quietly into his phone, his words lost in the chaos, but his urgency unmistakable. Meanwhile, on North Sentinel Island, Cale watched the approaching vessels through the morning mist. 3 ships this time, larger than the research vessel that had brought David back to retrieve him. The electromagnetic pulse generators hummed beneath his feet, ancient technology disguised as natural rock formations along the shoreline. They're not here for research, David said, emerging from the tree line with Naya beside him. His transformation was nearly complete now. The pale skin of his former life had given way to the olive complexion of the Sentinelese, and his eyes held a depth that spoke of shared memories spanning millennia. I know, Kyle replied. The question is whether you're ready to choose. David touched the pendant around his neck, feeling the warm pulse of the memory crystal against his skin. Through it, he could sense the approach of hundreds of minds, soldiers, scientists, politicians, all driven by the same hunger, that had destroyed the first civilization to discover the island's secret. The Atlanteans thought they could control it too, Naya said softly. They believed their technology made them worthy guardians of eternal life. How did that end? David asked, though part of him already knew from the inherited memories that grew stronger each day. In fire and flood, Kyle answered, when they tried to synthesize our gifts, to mass-produce immortality, the cellular matrix became unstable. The plague that followed consumed their empire in a matter of months. The first helicopter appeared over the horizon, its rotors cutting through the humid air like mechanical wasps. David could see the armed figures within, their intentions as clear as the weapons they carried. Dr. Chen managed to get word to me before they cut her access, David said, pulling out the waterproofed satellite phone he'd hidden in his shelter. The samples they took are already showing signs of cellular breakdown. Whatever they're trying to replicate is failing. It always fails, Naya replied. The gift cannot be taken, only given. And it cannot be given to those who would use it for conquest. The ships were closer now, close enough to see the military designations on their hulls. David recognized the formation, a containment operation designed to secure and extract high-value assets while maintaining plausible deniability. They'll kill everyone, he said, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders. The moment they realize they can't replicate what you've done to me, they'll eliminate all witnesses. Kyle nodded grimly. Unless we eliminate the threat first. The pulse generators, David breathed. They're not just defensive, are they? Our ancestors learned hard lessons about the outside world's hunger for power, Kyle explained. The electromagnetic field that protects our island can be redirected. Through the crystal pendant, David felt the collective consciousness of the Sentinelese as they took positions around the island. Children were moved to the sacred caves, while the adults prepared for what might be their final stand against the outside world's endless appetite for secrets. There's another way, David said suddenly. The samples they have, what if we could trigger the breakdown remotely, make them so unstable that no one would dare continue the research? Naya and Kyle exchanged glances, communicating through the shared consciousness that David was only beginning to understand. The memory crystals work both ways, Naya said slowly. What we've given you creates a connection. If you're willing to sacrifice your own immortality, the feedback could corrupt every sample they've taken. David looked at the approaching fleet, then at the people who had saved his life and shown him wonders beyond imagination. The choice before him was simple in its complexity: preserve his own newfound eternal life or destroy the secret that could doom both worlds. The helicopters were close enough now to see individual faces behind the visors. Time was running out, and the future of human civilization hung in the balance of one man's decision. Tell me what I need to do, David said. The extraction team's boats cut through the choppy waters of the Bay of Bengal as dawn broke over the horizon. Marcus felt his stomach lurch, not from the rough seas, but from what he knew was coming. 3 sleek military vessels approached North Sentinel Island with the kind of precision that spoke of careful planning and deadly intent. Dr. Sarah Chen stood beside him on the lead boat, her face grim as she studied the approaching shoreline through binoculars. The thermal imaging shows approximately 40 individuals gathered near the beach, she reported to Commander Hayes. They appear to be waiting. Waiting or preparing for war? Hayes asked, checking his sidearm. Marcus gripped the boat's railing tighter. They're not warriors. I told you. They're healers, protectors of something incredible. Something that nearly killed you, according to your medical reports. Hayes shot back. The cellular damage you exhibited was unlike anything we've seen. Whatever they're hiding on that island, it's a threat to global security. Through the mist, the island's jungle canopy emerged like a green wall rising from the sea. Marcus could make out familiar figures standing on the beach, Kira's distinctive silhouette among them. Even at this distance, he sensed their calm resolve. They knew this moment would come. "Commander, I'm reading electromagnetic interference," the boat's communications officer called out. GPS is fluctuating and radio contact with base is getting choppy. Chen frowned, lowering her binoculars. That's impossible. There's no technology on this island capable of— There's no technology, you understand, Marcus interrupted. The source isn't mechanical. It's organic, living. The boat slowed as they entered the shallows, engines cutting to a low rumble. Hayes raised his hand, signaling the other vessels. 24 armed personnel prepared to disembark, their weapons trained on the silent gathering of islanders. Remember, Hayes announced over the radio, we're here for extraction and containment. No unnecessary force, but prepare for resistance. Marcus stepped forward. Let me go first, alone. They trust me. Absolutely not. You've been compromised, possibly brainwashed or infected with some kind of pathogen. Then why am I getting stronger every day instead of sicker? It was true. The cellular regeneration that had begun during his time with the Sentinelese had continued accelerating since his rescue. Cuts healed within hours. His energy levels had tripled. Even his old back injury from the plane crash had completely disappeared. But the military doctors saw only an anomaly to be studied and contained. The boats reached the shallows. Marcus watched as Kira stepped forward from the group of islanders, her hands raised peacefully. She called out something in her native tongue, and the sound carried across the water with impossible clarity. She's saying they want to talk, Marcus translated. They're offering safe passage. How convenient, Hayes muttered. All teams advance formation, watch for hidden weapons. As the soldiers waded ashore, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. The jungle behind the islanders was moving, not with wind, but with a deliberate, undulating rhythm. The canopy itself seemed to pulse with life, and he realized the electromagnetic interference wasn't coming from any single source. The entire island was alive in ways that defied conventional understanding. Chen pulled out a tablet, its screen flickering wildly. The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's causing this, it's massive. Kira approached the water's edge, speaking directly to Marcus in broken English he didn't remember teaching her. You brought Deathmakers to Sacred Place. Why? I didn't have a choice, he called back. They came for me. No. They came for knowledge, same as always. Her eyes held no anger, only deep sadness. We hoped you different. Commander Hayes stepped beside Marcus, his weapon drawn but lowered. Tell her we're here for peaceful scientific research. We want to understand what happened to you on this island. Marcus started to translate, but Kira's laugh cut him off, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. I understand his words, she said, never taking her eyes off Marcus. But not his heart. His heart speaks only hunger. The jungle's pulsing grew stronger, and Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, a resonance he'd first experienced during the healing ritual. The other soldiers began looking around nervously as their equipment malfunctioned, and the very air seemed to thicken with invisible energy. Last chance for peaceful cooperation, Hayes announced, raising his weapon. Kira smiled sadly and spoke a single word in her language. The jungle responded instantly, erupting with a sound like thunder, but it wasn't sound. It was communication, a voice that spoke directly to the cellular level of every living thing present. Marcus felt his enhanced healing ability surge as the island's true guardians began to emerge from the trees, not human figures, but something far older, living vessels of the same force that had been healing him from the inside out. The real secret of North Sentinel Island was about to reveal itself, and Marcus realized with growing horror that some knowledge truly was too dangerous for the outside world to possess. The helicopter's rotors carved through the morning air as Marcus gripped the satellite phone, his knuckles white against the black plastic. Below them, the emerald canopy of North Sentinel Island grew larger with each passing second. Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from him, her archaeological equipment secured in military-grade cases, while Captain Rodriguez piloted them toward what might be humanity's greatest discovery or its final mistake. Blackwater Base, this is Archangel 1. Rodriguez spoke into his headset. ETA to target zone, 15 minutes. Marcus watched Sarah check her translation notes for the 100th time. 3 weeks had passed since David's impossible transmission, 3 weeks of satellite surveillance showing no movement from the Sentinelese village. The images revealed something that chilled him more than any hostile activity could have. The tribe had simply vanished. "The linguistic patterns in David's recordings," Sarah said, raising her voice over the engine noise, "they're not just ancient. They're foundational, like listening to the very first human language." Through his earpiece, Marcus heard the familiar voice of Director Harrison. "Remember, this is reconnaissance only. No direct contact. We need to understand what we're dealing with before—" The transmission cut to static. Marcus looked at his satellite phone. No signal. Rodriguez was tapping his radio controls, frowning. "All comms are down," the captain announced. "Some kind of interference." The island filled their view now, pristine beaches giving way to dense forest. But something was wrong with the landscape itself. Where satellite images had shown the Sentinelese village, there was only an empty clearing. The ancient structures David had described in his transmissions were gone, as if they had never existed. "There," Sarah pointed toward the interior. "That's not on any of our maps." A massive stone structure rose above the tree line, its surface covered in the same spiral carvings David had described. But this building was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral, and it was glowing with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from within the stone itself. Rodriguez circled the structure at a safe distance. "I'm not reading any electromagnetic signatures, but something's definitely affecting our equipment. GPS is going haywire." Marcus studied the building through binoculars. The architecture was unlike anything in recorded human history. Organic curves that seemed to flow rather than built, as if the stone had grown into these shapes naturally. At its base, he could see an entrance marked by towering pillars covered in those same hypnotic spirals. "David's in there," Marcus said with sudden certainty. "I can feel it." "Feel it?" Sarah looked at him sharply. "Marcus, you've been having those dreams again, haven't you? The ones you mentioned in your reports?" He had been. Every night since David's transmission, Marcus experienced vivid dreams of walking through corridors of living stone, following whispered voices that spoke in languages older than civilization. In the dreams, he always found himself standing before a massive chamber where thousands of people from every era of human history stood in perfect silence, their eyes reflecting that same golden light. "Set us down at the beach," Marcus ordered. "We're going in." "Sir, our orders were clear." "Our orders just became irrelevant." Marcus pointed toward the ocean, where a line of traditional Sentinelese boats was emerging from hidden coves. But these weren't the simple canoes documented by anthropologists. These vessels moved without paddles or sails, gliding across the water with impossible grace, their hulls inscribed with glowing symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the great structure. The boats formed a perfect circle around the island, their occupants standing motionless. Even from this distance, Marcus could see that each person's eyes reflected the same golden radiance David had described. Rodriguez landed the helicopter on the beach, his hands shaking slightly. "The engine temperature's spiking. We might not be able to take off again." As they disembarked, the sound of the ocean seemed muted, as if the island itself absorbed all noise. The jungle ahead was perfectly still. No bird calls, no insect sounds, just an expectant silence that felt alive. Sarah unpacked her equipment, but her devices remained dark. "Everything's dead. It's like there's some kind of field suppressing all technology except basic mechanics." Marcus shouldered his pack and started toward the forest path that led to the stone structure. With each step, the whispers from his dreams grew stronger, not heard but felt, calling him forward in words that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to something deeper in his mind. "The knowledge chooses its guardians," he said, the words coming from somewhere beyond his conscious thought. "It has been waiting." Behind them, the Sentinelese boats began moving inland, carried by no visible force, their occupants' golden eyes fixed on the three intruders who had finally answered an invitation extended across millennia. The great structure pulsed brighter, and Marcus understood with crystalline clarity that they were walking toward either humanity's greatest awakening or the end of everything they thought they knew about their own species. The helicopter blades churned salt spray as Marcus gripped the radio, his knuckles white against the static-filled transmission. 3 days had passed since the naval blockade tightened around North Sentinel Island, and every hour brought them closer to what Admiral Chen coldly termed containment protocol. "Dr. Hayes is no longer your concern," Chen's voice crackled through the headset. "Sentinel Island has been classified as a Level 5 biological hazard. No one gets in or out." Marcus threw the headset down and turned to Sarah, who sat hunched over her laptop, frantically typing. The anthropologist's face was gaunt from sleepless nights, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. Behind them, the portable genetics lab hummed with Dr. Patel's equipment, analyzing the blood samples David had somehow managed to transmit before communications went dark. "Tell me you found something," Marcus said, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. She looked up, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "The genetic markers David documented, I've been cross-referencing them with archaeological data from across the Pacific. Marcus, this changes everything we thought we knew about human migration patterns." Dr. Patel emerged from behind a wall of monitors, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "The protein structures in these samples, they're not just ancient, they're impossible. The cellular regeneration capabilities suggest a completely different evolutionary pathway. If this information reaches the wrong hands—" "It already has," Marcus interrupted, gesturing toward the warships visible through the helicopter's window. "Chen isn't here to protect the Sentinelese. He's here to weaponize whatever they've discovered." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "We need to warn David somehow. The tribe's knowledge, their genetic heritage. If the military gets hold of it—" A new voice cut through the radio static, urgent and desperate. It was Lieutenant Rodriguez from the lead destroyer. "Command, we have movement on the beach. Multiple figures approaching the shoreline." Marcus grabbed binoculars and peered through the helicopter's window. On the distant shore of North Sentinel Island, he could make out a small group of figures. Even from this distance, he recognized David's tall frame among the Sentinelese warriors. But something was different. David moved with an fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. His posture changed, his very presence transformed. "My God," Sarah whispered, watching through her own binoculars. "Look at how he's moving. It's like he's evolved." The radio crackled again. Admiral Chen's voice was sharp with anticipation. "Prepare the tranquilizer deployment. I want all subjects captured alive for study. Repeat, alive but unconscious." Marcus's blood ran cold. He had served under Chen during the Syrian conflict and knew the Admiral's capacity for ruthless efficiency. The Sentinelese weren't just protecting an ancient secret, they were walking into a trap. "Sarah, how long would it take to broadcast your findings globally?" She looked up, understanding immediately. "If I can reach a satellite uplink, maybe 20 minutes to get the basic data out to every major university and research institution worldwide." "Do it," Marcus ordered, then turned to Dr. Patel. "Package everything, genetic sequences, protein analyses, all of it. If this knowledge becomes public before Chen can contain it, the military can't suppress what's already in the scientific community," Patel finished, already copying files to multiple drives. Through the binoculars, Marcus watched as David stepped into the surf, his movements synchronized perfectly with the Sentinelese around him. The missionary who had crashed on this island was gone, replaced by something that transcended the boundaries between cultures, between the ancient and modern worlds. The radio erupted with chatter as the naval forces prepared their assault. Rubber boats were being lowered, tranquilizer weapons distributed, containment protocols activated. Marcus felt time slipping away like sand through his fingers. There, Sarah announced, hitting the final key sequence. The data is uploading now. Genetic evidence of a human subspecies that developed in complete isolation, showing unprecedented longevity and regenerative capabilities. Every major institution will have it within the hour. A new transmission cut through the naval chatter, this one in a voice that made Marcus's heart stop. It was David, but speaking in a language that seemed to flow like water, ancient syllables that carried impossible harmonics. Then, in English, tell them the truth was never meant to be a weapon. Some gifts can only be received, never taken. The transmission ended in static, but its impact was immediate. Admiral Chen's furious voice filled the airwaves, demanding to know how the subjects had accessed military frequencies. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched the sunrise paint the ocean gold around North Sentinel Island. Whatever transformation David had undergone, whatever ancient wisdom the Sentinelese carried, it would not become another tool of destruction. The truth was spreading beyond any one government's ability to contain it. But as the first assault boats hit the water, Marcus realized their victory might come at a terrible price. The helicopter's rotors cut through the morning mist as Marcus watched North Sentinel Island shrink beneath them. His hands trembled as he clutched the leather journal containing everything: the impossible healing techniques, the quantum consciousness theories, the revelation that human evolution had taken a radically different path on this isolated speck of land. Dr. Sarah Chen sat across from him, her laptop balanced precariously as she typed furiously. The genetic samples alone will revolutionize our understanding of neural plasticity, she said without looking up. We're talking about Nobel Prize territory here, Marcus. Multiple fields. Marcus said nothing. In his mind, he could still see Kyle's face as the helicopter had lifted off, not angry, but profoundly sad. The young Sentinelese had pressed something into Marcus's palm at the last moment, a small carved stone that seemed to pulse with warmth. The Foundation's board is already assembling, Chen continued. Pharmaceutical companies are offering unprecedented funding. We could have research teams here within weeks. Research teams. The words felt like ash in Marcus's mouth. Think about it, Marcus. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, traumatic brain injuries. We could cure them all. The healing techniques you witnessed, combined with their unique neurology, could eliminate human suffering on a scale we've never imagined. Through the helicopter's window, Marcus caught a final glimpse of the beach where he'd first awakened, where Asher had saved his life not through medicine, but through something far more profound, something that couldn't be bottled, patented, or sold. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Sir, we're getting multiple radio contacts. Looks like the whole world's been waiting for confirmation of your rescue. Chen's eyes lit up. Perfect timing. The press conference is scheduled for this afternoon in Port Blair. Marcus, you'll need to be prepared for questions about... No, the word came out sharper than he'd intended. Chen finally looked up from her laptop. No what? Marcus opened the journal, staring at his own handwriting. Detailed observations about the Sentinelese consciousness-sharing abilities, their apparent collective memory spanning generations, their capacity to accelerate healing through focused mental energy. Each page represented a violation of trust, a theft of sacred knowledge. They saved me, he said quietly. They welcomed me into their community, shared their most precious secrets. And this is how I repay them? By exposing them to the world? You're being dramatic, Chen said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. We're not conquering them. We're offering partnership, mutual benefit. Are we? Marcus flipped to a page near the journal's end, where he'd documented the tribe's most vulnerable moments. Children learning to share consciousness, elders passing down ancestral memories, the sacred ceremonies that bonded their community across impossible mental barriers. Because this reads like a shopping list for exploitation. The helicopter banked sharply, and Marcus saw Port Blair's harbour approaching. Dozens of boats crowded the water. News crews, research vessels, government officials. Even from this distance, he could see the camera lenses tracking their approach. 30 years, Marcus continued, his voice barely audible above the rotors. I've spent 30 years bringing the gospel to remote peoples, convinced I was offering them salvation. But maybe I was just another colonizer with better intentions. Chen leaned forward. Marcus, you're in shock. Post-traumatic stress. Once you've had time to process... They don't need our salvation, he interrupted. They found something we lost thousands of years ago. A way of being human, that we traded away for technology, for individual achievement, for the illusion of progress. You can't be serious. They live in huts, Marcus. No medicine, no communication beyond their island. You nearly died there. And they saved me using abilities we've forgotten how to access. They share consciousness, Chen. Not metaphorically, literally. Every thought, every memory, every moment of pain or joy flows between them like water. They've eliminated loneliness, eliminated the fundamental isolation that defines modern human existence. Marcus closed the journal and held it against his chest. What happens when we bring research teams, when we turn their gifts into pharmaceutical patents, when we reduce their sacred knowledge to peer-reviewed papers and profit margins? The helicopter settled onto the landing pad with a soft thud. Through the windows, Marcus could see the crowd surge forward, reporters shouting questions, officials pushing through barriers, photographers fighting for angles. We lose them, he said, answering his own question. Just like we've lost every indigenous culture we've studied and helped throughout history, we'll preserve their knowledge in our databases while destroying the living community that created it. Chen powered down her laptop, her expression hardening. So, what are you suggesting? That we pretend this never happened? That we ignore discoveries that could benefit all humanity? Marcus looked out at the mob of faces pressing against the helicopter's windows. Hungry faces, greedy faces, faces that saw only opportunity where he now saw responsibility. He thought of Kyle's final words, spoken in perfect English. Some gifts must be freely given or they become curses. The carved stone pulsed warm in his palm as Marcus made his choice. The evacuation helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Marcus held Sarah's trembling form against his chest. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandages wrapped around her shoulder where the tranquilizer dart had struck, but her breathing remained steady. Below them, the canopy of North Sentinel Island grew smaller, yet Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were carrying something far more dangerous than any physical wound. "She's stabilizing," the medic shouted over the engine noise, checking Sarah's vitals. "Whatever they gave her, it's wearing off naturally." Marcus nodded, but his attention was fixed on the satellite phone in his free hand. 3 missed calls from Director Harrison at the CDC. 2 from someone identified only as D. Cross, State Department. The outside world was already closing in, just as Kyle had predicted. Sarah's eyes fluttered open as they crossed into international waters. For a moment, confusion clouded her features. Then everything came rushing back. She gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "The samples," she whispered urgently. "Marcus, tell me you didn't—" "I destroyed them." The lie came easier than he'd expected. All of it. Gone. Relief flooded her face, but Marcus felt the weight of the hidden vial pressing against his ribs where he'd secured it beneath his shirt. The Sentinelese compound, their miraculous healing agent that could revolutionize medicine or destroy the last free people on Earth, pulsed with each heartbeat like a second conscience. The helicopter banked toward the approaching naval vessel, and Marcus caught sight of the massive carrier group assembled below. Far too many ships for a simple rescue operation. Through the aircraft's window, he could see figures in hazmat suits preparing a quarantine tent on deck. "Mr. Vale," the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "I'm being instructed to divert to the USS Meridian instead of the medical ship. New orders." Marcus's blood chilled. The Meridian was intelligence, not medical. Someone had been listening to their communications, had perhaps known about this from the beginning. Sarah's eyes met his, wide with the same realization. "We need to talk," she mouthed silently. 20 minutes later, they sat in a sterile debriefing room deep within the carrier's hull. The man across from them introduced himself as Agent Cross, mid-50s, sharp suit incongruous in the naval setting, eyes that seemed to catalogue every micro-expression. "Remarkable story," Cross said, setting down a thick file. "Hostile indigenous tribe suddenly turns helpful. Medical missionary makes miraculous recovery. Then everything burns down and you both barely escape with your lives." "That's essentially what happened," Marcus replied carefully. Cross opened the file, revealing satellite photos of the island, recent ones. "Except our thermal imaging shows the village wasn't destroyed by wildfire. The burn patterns are all wrong. This was deliberate, systematic." Sarah shifted beside him. "Maybe they were protecting themselves, burning evidence of contact." "Maybe." Cross pulled out another photograph, this one showing Marcus and Sarah on the beach, but taken from an impossible angle. Or maybe they were protecting something else, something valuable enough to kill for. The room seemed to shrink. Marcus forced his breathing to remain steady, hyper-aware of the vial against his chest. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Agent Cross." "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Vale. I'm stating facts." Cross leaned forward. "Fact. 3 pharmaceutical companies have approached the State Department in the last 6 months about potential research opportunities related to isolated populations. Fact. Your missionary organization received a very generous anonymous donation just before this trip. Fact. Sarah Chen's background includes advanced biochemistry training that's nowhere in her official missionary credentials." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe this wasn't a rescue mission at all. Maybe it was something else entirely." Cross stood, his shadow falling across the table. "And maybe what happened on that island, whatever you're not telling me, represents a national security interest." Marcus felt the walls closing in. Outside, he could hear the rumble of aircraft taking off and landing. The full machinery of government was mobilizing around them, and he finally understood the true scope of what they'd stumbled into. This wasn't about healing or helping anyone. It was about power, control, and the age-old human compulsion to possess what others had. "We've told you everything," Marcus said. Cross smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Have you? Because in about 6 hours, a joint CDC-NIH biological survey team will be landing on that island. And if they find anything at all that contradicts your story, things are going to get very complicated for both of you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Vale? That touching concern for indigenous rights? Very noble. But this is bigger than one small tribe now, much bigger." The door closed with a final sounding click, leaving Marcus and Sarah alone with the weight of impossible choices and the growing certainty that their ordeal was just beginning. The helicopter's rotors churned the morning air as David pressed his face against the window, watching North Sentinel Island shrink below. Each passing second stretched the distance between him and the only place that had ever felt like home. His ribs ached with every breath, but the physical pain paled beside the hollow ache in his chest. Sarah squeezed his hand. "You did the right thing," she whispered, though her voice carried doubt. "Had he?" David closed his eyes and saw Kyle's face, not angry or betrayed, but understanding in that profound way that had always unnerved him. The tribal leader had known this moment would come from the day they'd first spoken through the neural bridge. Perhaps he'd known it long before David had even crashed on their shores. "Sir," the pilot's voice crackled through the headset, "we're getting multiple radio calls, news crews, government officials, research institutions, words already spreading about your rescue." David's stomach clenched. The story would be sanitized, of course. Lone missionary survives plane crash, rescued after months on Forbidden Island. No mention of the impossible technology humming beneath the jungle canopy or the civilization that had mastered consciousness itself while the rest of humanity was still learning to make fire. The helicopter banked toward Port Blair, and David caught sight of the media circus already assembling at the landing pad. Satellite trucks, cameras, reporters with hungry eyes. They wanted their story of survival and salvation, neat and digestible for the evening news. But some stories couldn't be told. Dr. Martinez leaned forward from the medical station. "Your vitals are stable, but I'm concerned about these neural activity readings. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms? Hallucinations, memory gaps?" "Just tired," David lied. The truth was far more complicated. Even now, hundreds of miles from the island, he could feel the faint echo of the collective consciousness brushing against his mind. Kyle had warned him this might happen, that once touched by their gift, some trace would always remain. "You carry a part of us now," the tribal leader had said during their final conversation, "and we carry a part of you. Distance cannot break what consciousness has joined." The helicopter touched down amid a storm of camera flashes and shouted questions. David allowed himself to be transferred to a stretcher, playing the role of the weakened survivor while his mind reeled with the weight of what he'd left behind. Hours later, in a sterile hospital room, he faced his first real test. Inspector Rawat sat beside his bed, notepad ready, eyes sharp with professional curiosity. "Dr. Hartwell, I need to ask you about your time on the island. Our preliminary surveys show no signs of recent habitation, no structures, no evidence of the tribe everyone claims lives there." David kept his expression neutral. The Sentinelese technology was organic, grown rather than built, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural environment. To untrained eyes, their city would appear as nothing more than an unusually dense patch of jungle. "I saw them occasionally," David said carefully. "Small groups, very primitive. They left food sometimes, but we never made direct contact. I mostly survived on my own." Rawat scribbled notes. "The island appears remarkably pristine, almost as if it's been deliberately preserved. Did you notice anything unusual about the wildlife, the vegetation?" "Everything," David thought. Trees that responded to thought, flowers that could induce healing trances, animals that moved with an intelligence that suggested they were part of something larger. But he simply shook his head. "I was focused on survival. I'm not a biologist." After Rawat left, David stared out the window at Port Blair's busy harbor. Ships came and went, carrying cargo and passengers to destinations around the globe. Normal human commerce, driven by normal human needs. How strange it seemed now, this frantic scrambling for resources and territory, when the Sentinelese had long ago transcended such primitive concerns. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "An admission board wants to debrief you tomorrow. They're calling it a miracle." A miracle. David almost laughed. If they only knew the real miracle was that humanity's greatest achievement had been thriving in secret for millennia, and he'd just ensured it would remain hidden. That night, as morphine dulled his physical pain, David felt the mental bridge pulse with distant warmth. Across the dark waters, the Sentinelese were continuing their ancient work, healing not just bodies but the fundamental wounds in the fabric of existence itself. He'd chosen to protect them by choosing silence. But as he drifted toward sleep, David wondered if some secrets were too magnificent to keep forever. The world was broken in so many ways: climate change, war, the growing isolation of digital existence. What the Sentinelese offered could change everything. Yet change, as Kyle had taught him, came with a price, and some prices once paid could never be undone. The last thing David saw before sleep claimed him was the island in his memory, glowing softly in the eternal twilight of the collective dream, waiting patiently for a world that might someday be ready for such impossible grace.